That morning, as the grand opening of MaxSure's new headquarters was in full swing, with lights flashing, cameras clicking, and glasses of champagne raised, an old man quietly walked in through a side entrance. He didn't attract attention. There were no ribbons for him to cut, no seat reserved with his name on it. No one announced his arrival. In fact, no one even looked up as he passed by. He walked slowly, perhaps because of age, or maybe simply because he had no need to rush. One hand rested on a dark wooden cane. The other held a worn baseball cap, its brim frayed with time. His khaki jacket was faded, the fabric at the elbows thinning, threadbare, yet his black leather shoes were shined with great care, perhaps the only part of his appearance that still whispered of pride. There was no name tag clipped to his shirt, no invitation in his hand, no phone, no bag, just him, quiet, steady, walking among a sea of people dressed in tailored suits, exchanging polished greetings and flashing wide smiles with cameras. He passed through them like a shadow, and they, like the camera flashes around them, didn't register him at all. The event was organized with elegance. Fresh flowers on tables, high-hanging banners, and large black and white portraits of military legends, engineers, and founders who had shaped MaxSure's legacy. But the old man, mistaken by most as someone lost or confused, walked straight toward the area reserved for the honored guests. He didn't hurry. Every step seemed to carry the weight of memory. His eyes found a large brass wall near the main hallway, an honor wall, freshly polished, lined with names engraved in neat rows. Beneath each name were ranks, operations, medals, the kind of place people pause to take pictures. He stood in front of that wall for a long time. He didn't take any photos. He didn't speak. He simply looked and slowly shook his head. If anyone had been watching closely, they might have seen the faint tremble in his hand as he pressed the old cap to his chest. But his eyes didn't waver. They didn't just read names. They searched beyond them, into time, into memory, into faces no longer here. A group of attendees passed by behind him. Someone whispered, "Who's that old guy?" No one answered. To them, he was just another senior citizen who had wandered into the wrong place, a relic in the wrong museum. Yet just minutes later, the entire hall would fall silent. It began as he took a step forward, heading slowly toward the main event area, where the company president was giving a speech. The stage was lined with executives. Behind them, a massive screen projected phrases like legacy, valor, and pioneering excellence. No one on that stage noticed the old man approaching. 2 security guards did. One was young and clean-shaven, the other older, broader, serious-faced. They approached quickly but politely. One of them spoke up. "Sir, this area is for registered guests only. I'm going to have to ask you to return to the lobby." The old man said nothing. He continued to walk, slow, steady, unbothered. The second guard stepped in front of him. "Do you have an ID, sir? An event pass?" Still no answer. Then, slowly, the old man reached into the breast pocket of his faded jacket and pulled out a small metal plate. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't new. But the moment he held it up, everything shifted. At first, the guards looked at it with casual indifference. Then one of them leaned closer. He squinted, and suddenly his eyes widened. The other guard moved in, read the engraving, and took a step back. The plate read, "Lieutenant Colonel Raymond J. Hargrove, founder, Operation Hawk, 1972, Medal of Valor." Silence. No rushed apologies. No quick reaction. Just a moment of stillness, where time seemed to stop. A retired officer, a Medal of Valor recipient, a man whose name wasn't just engraved on the company's wall, but whose service helped build the very foundation it stood on. And yet, no one had recognized him. No one had welcomed him. Not until now. Across the room, a woman in a tailored navy suit, head of PR, stepped off the stage. Her face turned pale the moment she caught sight of the nameplate. "Colonel Hargrove?" she asked, almost whispering. "You're still alive?" The old man didn't answer. He just looked past her, up at the brass wall behind her, where his name was etched, misspelled. No one around him knew that just moments earlier, they had tried to escort out the man who had helped shape everything they were celebrating. He had just stepped into the edge of the Hall of Honor when two young security officers appeared. They were clearly trained, efficient, and confident. One looked no older than 20, with a buzz cut and acne still fading from his jawline. The other was more experienced, taller, broader, in his 30s, with a steady tone and practiced posture. They moved quickly toward the old man, handling the moment as if they'd done this 100 times before. "Excuse me, sir," the younger one said politely but firmly. "This area is reserved for registered guests. We'll have to ask you to return to the main lobby." The old man didn't react. He didn't look angry. He didn't argue or explain. His eyes were locked ahead. On the bronze wall at the center of the atrium, the one engraved with rows of names under the heading, "In honor of those who paved the way." He looked at it not with admiration, but with silence. The kind of silence you can only hear from someone who had been there, who had laid the stones others walked on. Now, he simply wanted to stand near it, close enough to face it. The older guard took half a step closer. "Sir, if you don't have an event badge, I'm going to have to escort you out." Only then did the old man reach slowly toward his chest. There was nothing hurried or defiant about the gesture. It was deliberate, calm, even respectful. His fingers slid into the inside pocket of his faded khaki jacket. When he pulled his hand back, he was holding a small, weathered metal tag, dull gray, its corners smoothed by time. He held it up without a word. The two guards leaned forward to read it, and then they froze. There was no more protocol, no more procedure, no more carefully chosen words. The tag, though worn, was still clearly engraved. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond J. Hargrove, founder, Operation Hawk, 1972 Medal of Valor. For a moment, the room fell still. The younger guard looked up, his eyes wide, lips parted but unable to form words. The older one took a step back and lowered his head, not out of duty, but out of recognition, reverence, realization. Before them stood not just any man, but one of the men, one of the architects of everything they were standing in, a man whose life's work helped birth the very organization now hosting this glittering ceremony, and they had just asked him to leave. Meanwhile, on stage, the event continued. The communications director was mid-speech, proudly citing MaxSure's deep respect for those who came before. Her voice carried through the hall. Spotlights stayed bright. The crowd clapped on cue. But none of that reached the security team standing by the old man. A woman in a fitted Navy suit approached. Her hair was pulled neatly back, and a clipboard rested in her arms. She was the PR director, the one overseeing this entire event. The moment she saw the tag in the man's hand, she stopped walking. Her face went pale. "Colonel Hargrove?" she asked quietly, as if speaking too loud might shatter something sacred. "You're still alive?" The old man didn't answer. He simply raised his arm and pointed toward the honor wall. There, among the many names, was his own, or rather, a version of it. Ray Hargrove, it read. No middle initial, no rank, no operation, no medal. Just a name, stripped down, simplified, anonymous. "I didn't come for flowers," the old man finally said. His voice was low, gravelly, and unmistakably steady. "I came to remind you, there are things you don't get to forget." The words weren't angry. They weren't sharp, but they landed like thunder. Around them, people had begun to notice. A sound technician turned and stared. A photographer lowered his camera. Even a few attendees near the buffet stopped mid-sentence, sensing something had shifted in the air. One of the guards removed his earpiece. The other took another step back, his arms loose at his sides, not out of protocol, but because he was standing in the presence of something much bigger than his job. The PR director was visibly rattled. She stammered, trying to find something to say, something that might make this moment easier. "Colonel, we didn't know. We had no idea. I'm terribly sorry if—" "You don't need to apologize," he interrupted gently. "I'm not here to be remembered. I just came to see if anyone else still remembers." He returned the tag to his chest pocket, the same quiet, intentional motion as before. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of decades. It was like sealing a door that had only briefly been opened. The woman didn't know what to say. She looked around, helpless, while the ceremony behind her carried on. On stage, executives were still smiling and shaking hands. Names were still being read. Plaques were still being presented. And yet, there stood a man who deserved all of that and more, and no one had called his name. He didn't walk toward the stage. He didn't ask for attention. He just stood there for a few more seconds, long enough to scan the faces around him. Young people who didn't recognize him, older ones who looked embarrassed, and others who had forgotten that everything they celebrated today had been bought with years they never lived through. Then he turned and began to walk away. The wooden cane tapped softly against the polished marble floor, each step steady, rhythmic. He didn't limp. He didn't slow. His back was straight, and his shoulders never dropped. He wasn't leaving in defeat. He was leaving with dignity. No one stopped him. No one dared. No one could. He turned and began to walk away from the ceremony platform, each step deliberate and measured, like a quiet punctuation mark to a life of service. The sound of his wooden cane tapping against the marble echoed softly, steady, firm, and unhurried. There was no rush in his stride, no bitterness in his posture, only purpose. No one moved to stop him. No one said a word. All eyes followed that fading figure, old but upright. His back wasn't hunched. His walk wasn't defeated. That silhouette, fragile with age yet proud in posture, somehow spoke louder than the polished speeches or the booming applause earlier. And then it happened. Not from a general, not from a CEO, not from the woman on stage, still clutching a script full of names and accolades, but from a young employee standing quietly by the side. He couldn't have been more than 25. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his tie a bit loose. He looked like someone still learning how to blend in with corporate life. He didn't speak. He didn't try to call attention. He simply stood tall, brought his right hand to his chest, and delivered a crisp military salute. It wasn't showy. It wasn't exaggerated. But it was perfect. A small gesture. But in that moment, it carried the weight of something sacred. It was not about recognition. It was about respect. Unspoken, unprompted, and deeply felt. And just like that, silence fell across the room. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It wasn't confused. It was reverent. As the old soldier walked away, the energy in the hall shifted. People straightened their backs. Eyes softened. The clinking of glasses and casual conversation stopped. Something unexplainable lingered in the air, like they had just witnessed a moment history would never write down, but the heart would remember. There was no applause, no announcement, just a quiet, collective stillness, the kind that says, "We were wrong not to see him sooner," the kind that humbles. The young man held a salute until the veteran disappeared past the grand doors. He didn't lower his hand quickly. He didn't glance around to see who noticed. He kept his eyes forward, and in that moment, he didn't stand as a junior employee. He stood as a witness. Maybe he didn't know the full history behind Operation Hawk. Maybe he'd never read the old colonel's name in any textbook. But he understood enough to know what kind of man had just walked through those doors. The kind that served quietly, that built legacies without ever asking for credit. The kind of man you salute, not because protocol says so, but because your conscience does. And maybe, just maybe, something changed in that young man's heart that day. The old veteran never looked back. He didn't need to. He knew, as all soldiers do, that sometimes the smallest acknowledgement at the right moment can say everything the world forgets to say. And so, he walked away as he arrived, without fanfare, without noise, leaving behind not just silence, but a space filled with reverence, a space where silence finally spoke louder than any speech could. There are people who pass through our lives like a quiet breeze, but when we realize who they truly are, the whole world seems to stop in silence. If you believe in gratitude, in honor, and in stories that make us reflect on who we are, then hit subscribe. Every day, we'll bring you a story that restores your faith in humanity.